They call it collective, but most people have no idea just how much of their personal lives, their decisions, emotions, relationships, fears, are shaped not by free will, but by something far more ancient, something buried so deep they don't even know it's there. Carl Jung spent his life peering into that hidden force. He called it the collective unconscious, a vast psychic inheritance shared by all of humanity. Not made of memories, but of patterns, invisible blueprints, the myths, dreams, archetypes, and instincts that guide civilizations and individuals alike. And whether you believe it or not, it is working through you right now. This isn't metaphysical speculation. This is Jung's lifelong observation through patience, dreams, art, war, and religion. He saw it everywhere, in symbols that crossed cultures, in traumas that echoed through generations, in the way people unconsciously played out stories older than history itself. And here's the chilling part. When we ignore this force, when we pretend that our ego is all there is, it doesn't disappear. It grows in the dark, and it begins to act on its own. In times of chaos, upheaval, or spiritual drought, the collective unconscious begins to leak. Into art, into politics, into war. It speaks through symbols. It possesses groups. It projects shadows onto enemies, and it drives people, entire societies even, to the brink of madness. Jung understood that what we call reality is never neutral. We see through a lens shaped by psychic energy, personal and collective. And that lens determines what we fight, what we fear, what we love, and what we destroy. So the question is no longer, is the collective unconscious real? The real question is, are you being lived by it, or are you finally becoming conscious of it? Because once you start to see it, once you learn to recognize the fingerprints of the unconscious, you can never go back. Suddenly, what looked random becomes meaningful. What seemed personal reveals itself as mythic, and what felt like suffering begins to make sense. The collective unconscious is not a belief. It's a structure. Jung described it as the psychic substratum, like the hidden wiring beneath a city. And just as every house in that city draws electricity from the same grid, every individual draws psychic material from this collective source. Your dreams? They come from it. Your instincts? They rise through it. Your fears, attractions, life patterns, yes, even those, are all filtered through these invisible psychic templates we call archetypes. You might think you're choosing your path, but more often than not, you're playing a role written long before you were born. The hero, the victim, the seeker, the mother, the trickster, the shadow. These aren't characters in a story. They're ancient psychic energies embedded in the human mind, and they emerge whether we want them to or not. Think about it. Why do so many people repeat the same relationship dynamics over and over? Why do entire nations fall into patterns of fear, pride, war, and rebirth? Because the collective unconscious doesn't just live in stories. It writes them, through us. When Jung first observed this, it shocked him. He began to realize that the unconscious wasn't just a garbage bin for repressed desires. It was intelligent, it was creative, and it had a will of its own. That's why he broke away from Freud. Because Freud believed everything could be traced back to childhood and sexuality. But Jung saw something deeper, something transpersonal. He saw that people weren't just suffering from personal wounds. They were haunted by archetypal forces they didn't understand. And unless they became conscious of those forces, they would be controlled by them. So Jung made it his mission to map the unconscious. Not just the personal unconscious, the memories and traumas unique to each individual, but the collective unconscious, the inherited reservoir of all human experience. And through his work, a terrifying truth emerged. Most people are not individuals. They are masks worn by archetypes. They are vessels for unconscious energies. And until they do the deep, often painful work of individuation, they are simply being played, like puppets, by the psyche itself. But there is hope, because the collective unconscious is not just dark. It is also rich, creative, transformative. It holds not only the roots of your suffering, but the key to your wholeness. When you start paying attention to your dreams, your fantasies, your projections, you begin to meet the figures within. You start to recognize the archetypes that have shaped you, and slowly, piece by piece, you begin to reclaim yourself. This is the legacy of Carl Jung. Not just a theory, but a map back to yourself, a way of navigating the hidden terrain that runs beneath every thought, every emotion, every interaction. The world is in crisis today, not just because of politics or economics, but because we've lost the language of the unconscious. We've forgotten how to read symbols. We've denied the shadow. We've mocked the mystical. And in doing so, we've become strangers to ourselves. But that can change. It starts with awareness, with courage, with the willingness to look within and ask, whose story am I living? And is it time to write a new one? Because here's what Jung feared most. When the collective unconscious is ignored, it doesn't become silent. It becomes loud through chaos, extremism, mass hysteria, and war. He saw it happening in his time. And if you look carefully, you'll see it happening in ours. In the build-up to World War II, Jung was disturbed not just by the political climate, but by what he sensed in the psyche of the people. He didn't see Hitler as a mere dictator. He saw him as a vessel, a man possessed by the collective shadow of a disillusioned nation. Germany, reeling from its humiliation in World War I, needed a myth to believe in again. And when a culture refuses to look inward, it projects outward. It seeks an enemy. It seeks a savior. It seeks a symbol. And symbols, Jung knew, are dangerous when they rise unconsciously. Nazism was more than politics. It was a psychic possession, a full-blown eruption of archetypal forces that overwhelmed rational thought. And that's what terrified Jung most, not the madness of one man, but the way the collective unconscious swept through a people and consumed their identity. But that wasn't an isolated event. We do it today too, in our politics, in our tribes, in the way we reduce people into categories. We choose scapegoats. We deify celebrities. We project evil onto the other side. And through it all, we believe we are acting rationally. We're not. We're acting archetypally. The collective unconscious isn't dormant. It's evolving with us, around us, through us. And nowhere is this more evident than in the modern phenomena of mass polarization, misinformation, and spiritual disconnection. We now live in a world of constant information, yet never before have we been so cut off from our inner truth. Jung would argue, it's because we are losing touch with the symbolic dimension. We are surrounded by images, but starved for meaning. And when symbols lose their sacred value, they become tools of manipulation. Advertising does this. Politics does this. Social media does this. Think about it. How often do you truly choose what you like, what you value, what you believe? How often are you just reacting? That reaction isn't just you. It's the collective unconscious playing through you, if you haven't made it conscious. And here's the paradox. The more technologically advanced we become, the more psychologically regressed we risk becoming. Because tools without wisdom are weapons, and power without self-awareness breeds projection, division, and collapse. So how do we protect ourselves? Jung's answer wasn't utopia. It wasn't revolution. It was something far more difficult and far more powerful. Individuation. Becoming a true individual. Not someone who isolates from society, but someone who takes responsibility for their own unconscious content, who integrates the shadow, who withdraws projections, who listens to dreams, who honors symbols, and who acts not from impulse, but from self. Because only an individuated person can stand firm in a collective storm. And this is where Jung's legacy becomes deeply relevant to our world today. In an age of algorithms, echo chambers, and artificial identities, we desperately need people who are rooted in their own psyches. People who are not possessed by every trend or ideology. People who can discern truth from archetypal manipulation. People who understand that behind every political movement, every cultural wave, every mass reaction, there is a symbol. And behind that symbol is an unconscious force. Jung didn't want to suppress the unconscious. He wanted to befriend it. He believed the collective unconscious held not just our nightmares, but our deepest wisdom. Because within the darkness of the archetypes lies something radiant. The self, the organizing center of the psyche, the blueprint of our wholeness. And when enough individuals awaken to this inner self, the collective itself begins to shift. This is the real revolution. Not overthrowing systems, but transforming the inner structure that feeds them. It starts with the courage to feel, to question, to dream, to reflect, and to realize that the enemy is not out there, it is within. The collective shadow only erupts when the individual shadow is denied. And so if you want peace in the world, you must wage war first, on your projections, on your illusions, on your inherited archetypes that no longer serve you. Only then can the archetypes become allies. Only then can you meet the hero within, instead of worshiping one outside. Only then can you become a stabilizing force in a world addicted to extremes. Jung didn't believe this work was optional. He believed it was essential to survival, psychic and global. And today, we need that wisdom more than ever. Because the unconscious is rising again. Not just in war, but in anxiety, in depression, in addiction, in the quiet emptiness that modern life cannot seem to fill. We think we're suffering personally, but in truth, we're often carrying the pain of a culture that has forgotten how to dream, how to pray, how to sit with symbols. Carl Jung offered us a path back, and though few walk it, those who do become the new myth makers, the ones who rewrite the script of the collective. By first facing the script within. To truly understand Jung's legacy, we have to go deeper, beyond theory, beyond society, and into the most intimate realm where the collective unconscious hides, your personal life. Because the collective unconscious doesn't only influence mass movements, politics, or war. It seeps into your decisions, your relationships, your triggers, your dreams. You don't have to be marching with a crowd to be possessed by the collective. You just have to be unaware of what's moving you. Have you ever reacted in a way that felt ancient? Like your anger wasn't just about this one moment? Or your fear didn't belong to you alone? That's not random. That's archetypal. Jung believed the personal unconscious was layered over the collective, meaning your wounds, your complexes, your inner conflicts are often echoes of much older dramas playing out through your unique story. Let's say you have a deep fear of abandonment. On the surface, it might trace back to childhood, but beneath that, there's an archetypal theme, the orphan, the outcast, the wounded child. You're not just feeling your pain, you're embodying a universal wound. This is why healing is so hard, because you're not just untangling your own story. You're confronting the myths you've unknowingly internalized, the stories your ancestors lived, the roles your culture expects, the patterns humanity keeps repeating. And that's where the collective unconscious becomes personal. Because if you don't recognize the archetype you're acting out, it acts you out. You become the puppet, not the author. Here's how that might look in daily life. You constantly rescue people, even when it drains you. You think you're just nice. But what if you're caught in the savior archetype, unconsciously seeking validation through sacrifice? You self-sabotage every time things go well. You think you lack discipline. But what if you're playing out the trickster, disrupting your own success because deep down, you fear being seen? You feel empty in relationships, always yearning but never satisfied. You think love is just hard, but maybe you're trapped in the lover archetype, chasing a divine union you haven't yet found within. This is the power and danger of the collective unconscious. It contains all the scripts, all the roles, all the masks, and unless you wake up, you don't realize you're wearing one. Jung called this process individuation, the gradual stripping away of false identities until you arrive at the self. The real you, not the ego you perform, not the archetype you inherited, but the conscious being who can hold all the roles without being defined by any of them. That's the real journey, and it's terrifying, because it means letting go of everything you thought you were. It means realizing your family dynamics were just echoes of a deeper pattern. It means seeing that the very thing you hated in your enemy lives in you. It means confronting your shadow, not just as an idea, but as a living force. And Jung warned, most people will do anything to avoid that confrontation. Because the shadow doesn't just hold our repressed desires or shameful impulses. It holds our power, our creativity, our authority, our right to exist. And reclaiming that is painful, because the first thing the collective unconscious teaches you is this. You are not who you think you are. You are more, and less, and endlessly becoming. This is why dreams are so important in Jungian psychology, because dreams bypass the ego. They speak in symbols, the language of the unconscious. In dreams, you're not bound by logic. You can meet the archetypes face to face, the wise old man, the terrible mother, the shadow stranger, the divine child. Each one is a messenger. Each one carries a key. And when you learn to interpret these dreams, not literally, but symbolically, you begin to map your own psyche. You begin to dialogue with the collective unconscious. And that's when life begins to shift. Because now, your depression isn't just a burden. It's a call from the underworld. Your anxiety isn't just a malfunction. It's a guardian at the gate of transformation. Your emptiness isn't proof you're broken. It's the space where the self wants to emerge. Jung believed this inner work was the highest form of activism. Because a healed individual does not project. A conscious being does not follow blindly. Someone who knows their own archetypes can't be manipulated by someone else's. And that is dangerous to systems built on unconscious compliance. Which is why, despite his brilliance, Jung's ideas remain fringe to this day. They don't sell products. They don't win elections. They don't go viral. But they heal. They offer something no system, no guru, no institution can offer. Yourself. The truth of who you are beneath all the roles. The clarity that comes when you stop chasing shadows and start integrating them. The freedom to choose your myth, rather than live out someone else's. And once you taste that freedom, the world will never look the same again. Now that we've explored how the collective unconscious shapes not only society but also your personal life, we arrive at the final, and perhaps most urgent, question. What now? What do you do with this knowledge? How do you live in a world that is constantly trying to pull you back into unconscious patterns? Carl Jung didn't just diagnose the human condition. He offered a way forward. But it wasn't quick. It wasn't easy. And it certainly wasn't comfortable. It was a path. A long, spiraling, deeply personal journey toward what he called individuation. Individuation isn't self-improvement. It's not about becoming better. It's about becoming whole. And wholeness doesn't mean perfection. It means integration. Of light and dark. Of masculine and feminine. Of conscious and unconscious. It means becoming aware of all the parts you've disowned. Your anger, your jealousy, your lust, your tenderness, your vulnerability, your power, and bringing them into the circle of the self. But here's the truth most spiritual teachings gloss over. This hurts. It hurts to see your own cruelty. It hurts to realize how often you've betrayed yourself. It hurts to admit that your suffering has served a role, that it's protected you from truths you weren't yet ready to face. And yet, this pain is sacred. Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain, because every time you make the unconscious conscious, something has to die. An illusion, a role, a belief, a defense, and in its place, a deeper you is born." This is why Jung placed so much emphasis on shadow work, because the shadow is the gatekeeper of the self. If you want to live a life that's not governed by the collective unconscious, you must pass through the shadow. And that means becoming radically honest about your own projections. It's easy to spot the archetypes in society. The tyrants, the victims, the saviors, the fools. But can you spot them in yourself? Can you admit when you're manipulating someone for their own good? Can you see when your self-righteous anger is masking your fear? Can you own the fact that the thing you hate in others might be something you're avoiding in yourself? This is the real work. Not changing the world, but changing how the world moves through you. Because when you stop projecting, you start perceiving. You start to see others not as roles to be judged or fixed, but as mirrors, each carrying a fragment of your own unconscious. And in that mirror, something incredible happens. Compassion is born. Not the sentimental kind, the fierce kind, the kind that sees clearly without flinching. You realize that everyone is acting out their myths. Everyone is caught in a web of archetypes they didn't choose. Everyone is haunted by ancestors, by symbols, by traumas they don't fully understand. And suddenly the world feels less random, less cruel, more tragic, and more beautiful. Because now, you're not just reacting. You're responding. You're choosing. That's the gift of individuation. But this gift isn't free. The world will resist your clarity. People will try to pull you back into their stories, their projections, their need for you to play a familiar role. You'll be called cold for setting boundaries. You'll be called arrogant for trusting your intuition. You'll be misunderstood, misjudged, even rejected. Because when you stop playing the collective game, you disrupt it. But here's the secret. You weren't meant to belong to the world. You were meant to wake it up. And you can't do that by fitting in. You do it by becoming whole. By walking your talk. By facing your fears. By loving the parts of yourself that others told you to hide. You do it by living your myth consciously. Because at the end of the day, that's what Jung wanted. Not a new religion, not a perfect system, but a deeper, more honest relationship with the mystery of being human. And mystery is exactly what the collective unconscious holds. It is not something to be mastered. It's something to be remembered. You've always known its language. You spoke it in dreams as a child. You felt it in moments of synchronicity, déjà vu, timeless awe. It's the part of you that knows, without knowing how. And when you reconnect to that inner knowing, when you start trusting the symbols that rise from within, you begin to dance with life instead of fight it. You stop seeking answers and start living the questions. You stop trying to fix the world and start healing the self. And in that healing, the world changes. Because every time one person breaks the spell of unconscious living, the collective shifts. Every time you choose authenticity over approval, the pattern weakens. Every time you face your shadow instead of projecting it, the world becomes a little more sane. This is Carl Jung's legacy. Not just a theory, a transformation. Not just psychology, a spiritual revolution. A call to stop sleepwalking through life. A challenge to look inward, deeply, bravely, relentlessly. To face what's hidden. To own what's yours. To carry your light with humility and your darkness with grace. So now the question is, will you answer that call? Because the collective unconscious will continue shaping our world, whether we acknowledge it or not. The only difference is whether you become a servant of its patterns or a steward of your soul. The choice is yours. If you're ready to explore that journey further, subscribe to the Awakened Compass and join the membership for deep dives, guided shadow work, and community support on the path of individuation. You don't have to walk this road alone. You just have to be willing to begin.